create the analytic view for the planned data, right? So we wanted to use the CE2 idea for doing the planned data. So let's go and see how to go ahead and quickly create it. Alright, I've unmuted all of you, so in case you have any questions, just unmute yourself and ask questions. Ravi, Prakash, any questions from your end?
No, Immanuel, not yet. I mean, I haven't had much time to practice, but I have a few and still yet to do.
All right. Srinivas, any questions?
No.
Aarti, I think everybody is able to hear me, so we're fine. Guys, if you have any trouble either able to see my screen or if you're not able to hear my voice, just raise your hand or go ahead and type it in the chat, alright? The session will be recorded and it will be made available to you. Alright, going back to what we were looking at. So yesterday what we did was we created an analytic view. The analytic view is from the package HANA Training SEP, and we created an analytic view on the CE1 idea table, which is basically the actuals data. All right. We use the data foundation layer. We chose a few fields, a few of the dimensions and a few of the value fields, and then we brought that onto a data foundation into the logical join, and then we linked them. This is where we actually build the star schema model, right? Now we go a little further from here. Yesterday we also tried to create something called as an input parameter, and then we had issues doing that. So we'll look at that also in today's session. All right. So just to get a little used to these models, let's also create a analytic view for the planned activity as well. If you remember, what we have done here is we are trying to filter out data based on the PA ledger currency type and record type. The PA ledger, we have selected this to be 2, and then what we have with the record type is the F type. All right. So we will go ahead and create a second analytic view for planned activities on the CE2 table. Okay. But before we go there, just to quickly show you the input parameters that we have created. So yesterday, once we have activated this, when we click on the go to preview, what you will find is that on the entire data set you have the ability to go ahead and define a variable. And here if you want to look at it, so based on the input that you give, your data set is defined. Alright, so the raw data that you see here is filtered based on the land one. Now over and above that, you want to, let's say, use an input parameter to specifically bring in a particular set of the column on a calculated column. So we can use an input parameter. All right. So let's say I want to go ahead and create an input parameter. I'm giving you a basic explanation about how an input parameter can be used. So let's say I have something called as input parameter 1. So I'm using a static list in here. The data type is let's say is a varchar. I'm going to use of length 15. So yesterday we tried to use two columns. One is for gross revenue. The other one is to use it with, let's say, sales deduction. Now I'm giving two options in here based on the kind of input parameter that I give. My column that I'll be using this with will generate the data for specific. So let's say I create a calculated column here based on my input parameter. I right click on it and say new calculated column. I wanted to create it as a decimal because I'm going to bring in either gross revenue or sales deduction in there. The length is 15. The scale decimal is 2. I'm going to create it as a measure. So what I'm going to do here is define a small condition in here saying if my input parameter if the value that is provided for my input parameter is gross, in that scenario, I would want to go ahead and generate the data for my gross revenue. Alright. If not, I want to generate data for my sales deduction. A small condition here from the static list. Alright, and so I just check on the validity of the syntax, say valid expression. I go ahead and click on it. So I have a column here called as calculation column 1, and what I'm going to use is my input parameter. First let's check whether what we've done is valid. So I'm validating it. It says completed successfully. I'm activating it. Okay. I'm trying to look at the data preview in here. So I have two values. One is the variable which I will need to first enter for my data set, and here I'm going to give it as US. From the subset, I'm going to use the input parameter. Alright, and so I get to choose what is the parameter that I'm using. Let's say I selected gross. So when I say OK, the column that will be defined on the calculated column will be from gross revenue. Right? If you look at gross revenue, you have this column. And if you look at the calculated column, you have all the data specific to the gross revenue. Alright, because your input parameter that you have entered is the gross revenue, which is linked to generating data from this column. On a similar front, if you go and refresh the data, so here I'm going to select US again, and my input parameter I want to select sales deduction. I select OK. And what you will find here is basically this data being shown here in the calculated column. So the input parameter basically is like a list of values that you could choose to define what exactly you want in here. Alright. So you could use the input parameters that way. Alright. So let's go quickly and also create an analytic view for the plan data. I'm going to right click on it, click on new. We're going to call this as CE2 underscore analytic underscore view. Click finish. The table that we want to use in here is basically from CE2 idea. So it is here on this particular schema. So I'm going to click on OK. First level, we're going to apply the same filters on it, just like how we did on the actuals. I'm going to click on apply filter 02. Say OK. Same thing for record type, apply filter, it's going to be an F type. So select F. Once you do that, let's go and select the columns that we need. First, we'll start off with customer, add to the output, product number, then you have VKORG, which is sales org. Controlling area and company code. You don't have the actual versus planned indicator in here, in this particular planned stuff. You also don't have the period information here. Alright. So let's say these are the dimensions that we want to select. Apart from this, let's go and select the values in here. Previously we had VV010, that was the gross revenue. Here you have a different naming, VV010001, that is gross revenue. So add it to the output. Accrued sales deduction. Then you have price variance. And then 960 you will have miscellaneous expenses or other expenses. Alright, so these are, this is the data foundation that you're choosing from the entire fact table. Okay, so we're going to bring that to the logical join. Now, apart from this, let's also bring in the location attribute view into the logical join and also the product attribute view. Okay, we're going to connect the customer number to the customer number. If you look at the properties in here, it will show a referential join. The cardinality is what we will have to define. If you see the left element, it is a data foundation layer. The right element is the actual dimension. So for one value of the dimension, you have multiple values within the data foundation. So it will be an n:1. On a similar note, let's also join the material number. So here also the cardinality, you have data foundation as the left element and the right element is the dimension value. n:1 is the cardinality. Let me change the names in here. Gross revenue. Price variance. Other expenses. I'm going to also create some calculated columns. Contribution margin 1. I'm going to create it as a decimal. Length 15. Scale 2. Creating it as a measure. Deriving it from gross revenue minus sales deduction. Valids index. I'm also creating a contribution margin 2. We also have a few restricted columns also in here. RC1 and RC2. Let's build them also. Let's say we just keep them as they are till the calculated columns. You can validate it, or before we do the validation, let's go into the semantic layer. So you have the CE2, you have all of it defined. Okay. So these are your fields, so let's validate and check. So it says completed with errors. Yeah, go ahead, Akhilesh.
Immanuel, regarding this error analysis, do you have any document for us to, because I feel like the errors are not very self-explanatory. Do you have any document with the frequent errors or some sort of give an indication as to what the errors could be?
So there is no document. What it says here, if you read through it, is that you have an extra column which is MANDT, because of which you're having issues. So do you have to either create an alias to it, or you will have to go ahead and take it off. So that is the problem that it's creating here. So let's try to remove the column N from here. So I have the analytic views for actuals and planned created. Let me just Alright, so this is basically how you create the analytic view. So let's try to pick a scenario where we might want to go ahead and bring together two analytic views. Alright, so let's say we want to generate something like a variance report, or let's say you want to go ahead and um, bring together, this is from the sales or from the COPA side, you want to link it with a finance analytic view. In those scenarios, you want to use a calculation view. So in such scenarios, let's see how we could go ahead and build a calculation view. So after attribute view and analytic view, I can right click on it and then say create a calculation view. So let's say so I'm going to click on finish. Alright. It has two options. Either you can create it as a graphical way of creation, or you can go ahead and create it as a scripted way. Alright, first let's try to understand how to do it in a graphical way, and then we'll talk about how to use it in a scripted way. Alright, so here we want to bring in the actuals analytic view and the planned analytic views together, and then we want to do some kind of a variance report in here. So we need to bring in these two different analytic views and try to define a join. A calculation view basically is used in scenarios where you want to define complex joins. By the rule, what it says is always go with graphical way of using it. But if you are not able to use it with the graphical mode, then you can go for scripted. Alright. The scripted will use a lot of computing engine functions. So we'll also look at what are the computing engine functions that are available. Alright. So when you want to bring in a calculation engine or a calculation view, so you'll have to bring in these analytic views into the graphical environment. Alright. So the first thing that you're going to bring in here is, let's say here you have something called as projection. So we'll understand each of these things that are here. On a calculation view, so let's say I just drag this in here. Okay. So here you have analytic view that we have just dragged in here. Over and above that, if you want, I can drag in the second analytic view as well. Okay. You might not want to use all columns from both of these views. Alright. Whatever you want to go ahead and use, you would want to go ahead and specifically filter them out. So what you have here is an option to choose what are the fields that you want to use. Alright. And so here you have an option called as projections. On top of the actual views that are being used, here within the calculation view, you could use analytic views, you could use already existing calculation views, you can bring in attributes, you can even bring in normal tables also, and you can connect them. Okay, so what you have to use on top of, usually on top of these individual analytic views, is a projection layer, basically, which allows you to choose what columns you want to use. Alright, you could filter out a few columns, you can create new columns, so you could choose what columns you want to use. So firstly, I'm going into the and I'll choose. Before I do that, let me also bring in a projection. So I'm calling this as projection 1. If you see here, I'm going to move this. So I'm going to link my first analytic view to my projection 1. Similarly, I will bring in projection 2. I'm going to link my analytic view to projection 2. Okay, so this is my second projection that I have. So if I go in here, I get to choose, I get to create new columns, I can create input parameters, I can create filters. Okay. So if I go into the projections, I am right now in projection 1, which is based on my actuals. So here is the projection 1, which is based on the CE1 analytic view. I have to choose what columns I want to use. Add to the output. I can choose all of them at one shot as well. I have CM1 and CM2, so I'm going to use these. I'm not bringing in the other columns. So I'm not going to use my restricted key figures. I'm going to bring in all of these other columns. And if you see here, there's one column called as PLIKZ, which is the plan versus actual indicator. Okay. The second projection that we have, let's say we have chosen what columns we want to use. In case you want to do any calculated columns, you could do that. You could do input parameters if you want to. So here I'm going into projection 2. Add to output. Add to the output. I want to also have this column, which basically is my planned versus actual indicator. So I have PLIKZ. It is length 1. It is a data type of nvarchar. All right. So PLIKZ. All right. Go in here. Create new. So you create a column called PLIKZ. I'm going to give the value as 0 for this. I believe the value for the other one is 1. I'm going to use this here. Now what I can do here is I can bring these as a union, or I can define a join. Alright, so there are multiple options. A union, as we all know, is basically to define some way of linking both of these, and then you can bring in all the fields across both the projections. So I'm going to use a union function here. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect projection 1. We're also connecting projection 2. Once we connect projection 1 and projection 2, so you have all the fields in here. Similarly, you have projection 2, all the fields in here. Now you have to go ahead and bring them to the target. So here you have an option to choose how you want that data to be linked. You don't have to manually go and bring all of them. You can either create a target, or you could go ahead and fill the target. So here if you see, I have linked both of them, and for the ones which have the values, it will go ahead and link the fields too. So if you can see, VKRG has inputs from both projection 1 and projection 2. PLIKZ has from 1 and 2. Bookers has this controlling area. Plant has only value from 1. Gross revenue has from both. Sales deduction. It's based on the naming that you've given. So you have most of them from both. So I will just remove the plant from here. Okay. Once you've done that, now all the columns which are measures will need to be aggregated. So let's go and link this. So if you go into the aggregation level, you can see in here, you can choose which are your attributes, add to the output, which will be added directly, but the values which are the columns or the measures, you have the option to go ahead and directly say add as aggregated column. So you can select that in here. I'm going to select it till here. All these columns are Alright, so in case you want to do any more calculations or restricted columns, or you want to add some input parameters, you could do that. Then you go to the semantic layer and you define which are attributes and which are measures again. Okay. Once you've done that, then you could go and validate your data. So it says completed with warnings. Just check what your so for the same values you will find price variance, but you will also want to look at the PLI KZ. Probably think been one in here. Either you could do it this way, you'd bring in material number and PLI KZ. Or you could see it at a row level. So you have a few planned values and you have a few actual values. If you want to generate a variance report, you will name these columns based on it, and then you can generate them one after the other so that you are able to create an amount field in case you want to deduct gross revenue from here minus the planned. You could do that. Alright. So the calculation view, what we've seen is a union function. You could use the join function as well. You can create the left outer join, or basically the intersection. Alright. So this is what you could do using the calculation view. We'll look at how to create a join function in tomorrow's session, where we can link them, either a left outer join or a right outer join, and how to connect it to the aggregation layer. When you import objects from BW into here, where we could bring in objects from BW system. If you have a BW on HANA system, if you can move objects across from BW into HANA. When you create info cubes, it will automatically create it as analytic views and calculation views. Alright, so we'll see that as we go along in our sessions. Okay, any questions? Akhilesh, do you find this similar to a multi-provider?
Yes, actually I do find it similar to a multi-provider, but within a multi-provider, not we don't have various options as what kind of joins. It's everything is a union join, whereas here we have an option as to what.
So when join comes in picture, it's pretty much like an info set.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, but I need to practice how in terms of join. If you today we tried the union, isn't it? If you try the other join, in terms of configuration, it would be a similar way where we add projections and say what kind of join.
Exactly. So all that you bring in here is just a join feature in here. And we get to define what joins we can go ahead and give. Type of join. So you get to choose what joins you can go ahead and give in here.
And I'm curious as to why do we have names as projections? I mean, projection means it's as a projection is because trying to understand why the name as projection.
See, an analytic view is available, okay, and you might not want to use this entire analytic view as it is. The projection gives you the ability to choose from the entire analytic view as a set and also drop off a few columns which you don't want to use, add a few columns that you want to use here. So it gives you a lot of extra ability in here. That's why it is called as a projection. So it will take a snapshot of your analytic view.
Right, okay.
Right, so you could, apart from the actual analytic view that is used, so now what happens is you're bringing the analytic view as is. So if it is making changes on the analytic view, then you will have it affected on this value here. So you have another layer on top of it where you can make changes to the existing analytic view. In a calculation view, you want to make some additional columns or you want to create some additional columns. So the projection view can handle it, keeping the analytic view intact and making changes on the projection layer. So this will not affect the analytic view, but when you, in the use case of a calculation view, the projection will be used. All right. So to keep the analytic view constant.
Okay.
All right. So we could practice this thing. All right. So we've seen basically these three models. Right. What we will start looking from tomorrow is we'll use the join quickly in tomorrow's session, and then we'll see how to move data across from SAP systems and non-SAP systems into SAP HANA using replication engines. So in these sessions we'll talk about SLT and data services. All right. Any questions? Ravi, are you able to follow?
Yeah, I'm following. We're building this attribute views, analytical views, and calculation views, right? I mean, analytic views, we're building columns as well as calculated columns, and restricting values and giving input parameters also. So is this generally, like normally, is this like reporting, or because we have all the data?
This is not reporting. We're just modeling here.
They're just modeling here. Okay, but still we are able to see the data when we give the input parameter.
Exactly.
As
So that is the advantage of HANA. So you are able to look at data immediately. You're also able to have a picture of how this is going to look like when you're generating a report. So you have the ability to look at this report immediately. But usually what you will do in other systems is you will have to take this object and you will have to open it either in Business Explorer or you will have to export it to a business objects layer. Here also you will have to do that, but the developer will get to have an idea as to how this end user is trying to look at the report. Alright, so that's why it's giving you different preview options. One is to look at the entire data as raw data, just like in a normal file. You get to see all the distinct values that are available, and you also get to analyze the data.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. But this will have limitations in reporting, right? We are only.
So this is just a very small snapshot. So let's say you want to create variables or you want to create stuff. So it doesn't give you the full scope of how it is. This is not what you're going to transfer it to an end user.
Okay.
So this is for you to play around and see what you want to build in here, integrated into the system. But once we create these views, after we finish how to go and move data, and we'll see how we integrate it with business objects and SAP Lumira for you to report on top of it. All right. Sometimes you use directly a reporting tool on top of SAP HANA. They are able to read the analytic views and the calculation views. Some of them can't read them directly, so you